Thank you, Lou. And rounding out our speakers this afternoon is Jean Caroon. Jean has earned national recognition for her expertise in applying sustainable design strategies to existing buildings and has directed adaptive reuse in a broad range of sectors, including educational, civic, and cultural properties. Appointed by the Commissioner of the United States Public Building Service, Jean has literally written the book on our topic today. Her book is called Sustainable Preservation, Greening Existing Buildings. Please welcome to the stage Jean Caroon.
Well, you are a very proper audience, so I have a deeply personal question for you, and I want you all to answer honestly. Who brushed their teeth this morning? Okay, that is very good, because if you didn't raise your hand, the person next to you has to move, or at least give you a breath mint. So if you brushed your teeth this morning, you understand stewardship. In fact, you endorse stewardship. You know that a healthy mouth, healthy teeth, requires daily action, requires ongoing stewardship. Stewardship is actually the foundation of the environmental movement. It was the Sierra Club that started the 3 R's that we use so often, although we seem to focus on the last one perhaps more than we should. The first 2 are really the most important. The first 2 are about reducing our resource consumption, reusing the resources that we have already used, and at the very, very last resort, recycling. So why does the Sierra Club, who started this over 40 years ago, care about this? Why do they care about our resource use? Because every object around us is not only going to landfill or having a cycle further down. It had an incredible environmental impact before it got here. Every object, even the green objects, has an environmental impact before it got here. You know, if you even just think about the waste stream, the conservative estimate is that every object, like this podium, has a 70-to-1 factor. 70 times the waste before you got this one object. If you talk about rare metals, a wedding ring, probably 3 tons of waste. Although I said that once, my husband was in the audience and he shouted, "It's fake!" So it was okay. But, well, at least for the audience it was okay. It wasn't okay for him. But, so there's an incredible stream of impact that all these objects have had. Of course, the problem is it isn't all in one place. There isn't some stack of 70 podiums somewhere. You know, there's a little bit in India, a little bit in China, maybe a little bit in New Jersey. It's all around us, but it's hard to quantify. And so it's the real challenge of just knowing that there was an environmental impact on that object, knowing that you can't create an object without having an environmental impact. Which is why it's incredibly important, as we've heard over and over and over again, in a sustainable world, to value what already exists, to use what already exists. Bottles are great, but buildings are our biggest objects. Buildings have millions of things, all of which had an environmental footprint before it got here, all of which is going to have an environmental footprint as it leaves. Buildings are the things that we make well. They have an incredible life. They can last hundreds of years. Even if you don't brush their teeth, they can last hundreds of years. They last a long time. So they must be considered with some respect. In New York, you have 1 million+ buildings. I'm told by MAS that a very small percentage of these are protected historic buildings. About 1,000, a little over 1,000 individual buildings, another couple, 20, 30,000 that are in historic districts. So 3.2% of the building stock in New York City is protected. Do you think Ed Glazer knows this? You know, this is 3.2% of protected buildings out of millions of buildings. I mean, so what does that mean? Can we green these buildings? Why do people keep asking me this question? Of course we can green these buildings. We can green any building. Green is like brushing your teeth. You don't get to just do it every 10 or 20 or 30 years. Green is ongoing stewardship. We can green this building. We can monitor the fans. We can monitor the lights. We can use new technologies. We can use new incentives. Green is an ongoing process. We can green buildings in very simple ways that have very quick paybacks, that offer incentives, that are economically viable. You can put in motion detectors. You can put in thermostats if you can figure out how to make them work. You know, it's always a little catch on the people thing. But you can do all of these things that reduce the impact of buildings. It's not rocket science. It's happening all over. The more energy costs, the more we'll start to be more effective about it. But did you know in the residential sector, we actually have decreased the amount of energy we're using to heat and cool our homes, but we have not decreased the amount of energy we're using because we have more than doubled the amount of appliances and televisions and computers that we're plugging in. The plug load is going through the ceiling because of the way we live. Now we can do simple things around buildings. We can do green rain gardens. We can think about how we live in the world. We can think about how we are connected to the earth. That's really what green is all about. And we can learn from historic buildings. We can learn about doing durable, repairable, and cleanable surfaces. You can clean many historic surfaces without using solvents. Did you know that the cleaning industry creates 60 billion pounds of chemicals every year? 60 billion pounds. So why wouldn't we create in a green world things that don't require solvents to be cleaned? Now we can also do more complex things. When we get to renovate whole buildings, like the federal building that's in the distance, we can change out all the systems, we can increase the density, we can put in fancy things like green roofs and skylights and solar panels. We can green things in many, many different ways. We can use new technologies, which were already alluded to, like ground source heat pumps. None of this is rocket science. Of course we can green historic buildings. It's just that it's a little bit more complicated sometimes. Now, my husband doesn't like this slide, but my point is that killing Harold does not reduce her carbon footprint, unless, of course, she's going to move right in with somebody. Because if she's living with Harold, she's sharing resources. She's sharing the bed, we think. She's sharing the television. She's sharing the energy that's used in the space. So it is complicated. We tend to talk about buildings as though it was their fault. You know, the building uses too much energy. Well, you know, maybe if there are air conditioners in every window, maybe if the windows clearly haven't been maintained, but it isn't the building that is using the energy. It's us. It's the way we use buildings. We measure energy by square foot, but that's not the point. Energy is really about the number of square feet that each of us are using. There was a time, once upon a time, before my time, when existing objects, existing buildings, existing anything had economic value, and it was more effective to repair it. It was more effective to extend its service life. It was even more effective and economically viable to move it. I am a preservation architect. My nemesis is the economy. My nemesis is being told over and over again that it is more economically viable. It is cheaper to replace a door than to repair it. It is cheaper to replace a window than to repair it. It is cheaper because we don't pay the economic value of the environmental value of the products that are replacing what already exists. It is cheaper to replace a building and economically viable to replace a building and build a new, bigger building, a building that might even be called green, but is a big, big building with lots of impacts. So my challenge isn't about the heritage that I'm charged with protecting. My challenge is about an economic structure that doesn't put full value on what's going on around us, My challenge is that I can say until I'm blue in the face that a dollar spent on renovation creates more jobs than a dollar spent on a product. We know it does. And those jobs are local. So why are we having this challenge? This fact that we have an economic structure that supports new is probably the reason that of all the resources we use in this country, half of them go for new construction, for infrastructure, for water systems, for roads, for bridges. We have 5% of the world's population. We use 30% of all the resources on the earth. And half of those go into new construction. We have a moral responsibility to make sure that the way we spend these resources has a long service life, is going to live and last as long as possible so that we don't have to replace it and use more of resources that are becoming harder and harder to find. But what's even more alarming to me is that new construction has the highest toxicity level. And these are only the toxins that we acknowledge. 4.1 million pounds that the EPA tracks. We don't track things that are considered toxic in Europe. The fire retardants that have been required in California for 20 years have long since been banned in Europe. The phthalates that make every vinyl product flexible are not tracked. In fact, very, very minute parts of phthalates are known to reduce sperm count. It's known fact. So vinyl baseboard actually could become the new solution to population control, which is maybe something to think about. But toxicity is a very big deal, and we don't acknowledge it. We don't really think about it. I wrote this book in a way not because I'm a preservation architect. I am a preservation architect because I'm an environmentalist. That's where I came from. I came from working in wilderness zones. And I know that the only way to protect the wilderness zones is to consider how 7 billion people live on this planet and how we use the resources of this planet. It was John Muir who founded the Sierra Club, who called himself a preservationist, who pointed out that when you pull on one little thread of nature, you find it connected to everything else. Everything is connected. Everything pulls together. Everything touches everything. So that brings us back to your 1 million+ buildings. 1 million+ buildings, a livable city. The things we've heard these last 2 days are wonderful and they give me hope. But your livable city touches this entire planet. And as a friend of mine said, a contractor, when I talked to him about these issues of waste and toxicity, he says, "You can't see it from my house." Well, you can't see it from your house, but what you do inside this house, what you do as a model for the rest of the world, is incredibly important. And sustainability is built upon stewardship. A sustainable world, a healthy world, is a world that values what already exists, a world that uses it creatively, that places economic value on what already exists, and creates policies and economic incentives. This is incredibly important. Policies and economic incentives that make it more viable to repair something than to replace it, more viable to extend its service life, more viable to put that new slate roof on rather than the asphalt roof that's going to have to be replaced in 20 years, more viable to keep using and thinking about what we have and what the impacts of what we have are. Thank you.